In this lecture, we're going to learn how to test the components defined by the Vue router library. One of the most common features we use from the router library is generating links. We should check if the router link component is correctly rendering the right links. Open the song item component file in your editor. This is a component that'll generate a link to an individual song. The link is generated with the router link component. We're binding the to property to pass in a configuration object for the link. We're telling it to generate the link based on the song route record. The record has one parameter called ID. This component will output a link. We're going to write a test that will check if the router link component can output the correct link. We'll need to provide the component the document ID because the router link will generate the link based on the ID in the route. Let's get started. We'll create a test file for testing the router. We could add the test to the song item test file. However, we're not trying to test the component specifically. We're trying to test if the router works. It makes sense to put tests for the router in a separate file. In the tests folder, create a file called router.spec.js. At the top of the file, we're going to need a couple of things. First, we'll need the shallow mount and router link stub properties from the Vue test utils package. Secondly, we'll import the song item component. We have everything we'll need for this test. We'll add the describe block. The identifier will be called router. Inside the describe block, add a test block. The description will be the following: renders router link. Next, we'll need to mount the component. Before we can do so, we'll need to create some data. The song item component relies on the parent component to supply it with data from the parent component. Let's create the data we'll supply the song item component. Create a variable called song. This variable will be an object of props we'll pass down to the component. The data used in the song item component is passed down from the parent component. Since we're isolating the component, we'll need to pass down the props data ourselves. The song object will contain the props data. There's one prop we'll add to the object. It'll be the document ID. Set it to a random string. Afterward, we'll create a variable called wrapper. Set it to the shallow mount function with the song item component passed in. In the second argument of the function, we'll pass in the options object. We can add the props to the component by defining the props data property. This property will be an object of props to pass down to the component. We'll pass in the song variable. Next, we'll need to mock the router link component. This may be confusing because we're trying to test it. However, we still need to mock it since we're not registering the router plugin. Luckily, the stub component from the utilities library is able to replicate the features of the router link component. It's completely testable. We can register a component by adding the global object. Then, we'll add the components object. Inside this object, we'll add the router link component. It'll be set to the router link stub component. The last thing we'll do is write the test assertion. Call the expect function. The value to expect will be the value we passed into the to property of the router link component. We can retrieve the value by selecting it. We'll use the wrapper.find component function to select the component. Previously, we used the find all components function to select components in a wrapper. The find component function will select a single component in the wrapper. It will not return an array of components even if there are multiple copies of the same component in the template. We're not looking to test every link since they'll all point to the same song. Selecting a single component will work for our test. the component can be selected with the router link stub component because that's what we're stubbing it with. The to property is passed down to the router link component as a prop. We can access the list of props on a child component by chaining the props function. We'll access the to prop. By retrieving the prop, we can test if it's being set properly. We'll chain the to equal function. Switch back to the song item component. Search for any of the router link components in the template. We're going to copy the object we bound to the to property on the component. Then, back in the test, we'll pass this into the to equal function. Format it if you need to. The assertion we're writing will retrieve the to property value we passed into the component. We're checking if the component is being provided the correct object. Let's run the test. The tests will run successfully. We were able to test the component by checking if it received the data for rendering the link. The router library is easy to test. You will want to write tests for checking if the router is able to generate links to the pages you want to redirect users to. We're finished with unit testing. In the next set of lectures, we're going to start looking at different types of testing. When you're ready, I'll see you in the next one.